shows, like they'd have a big convention and there would be a Saturday night banquet and then entertainment, and I was part of a comedy troupe that would perform, and we would meet with the vice presidents of the company ahead of time to write the show, and they would tell us, oh yes, here's this character, everybody knows, this is what the life of these people is like in our company. And I met with Bell of Pennsylvania for their show.
Your microphone's cutting off. We're going to trade. There you go.
So I did a show. Did a show for Bell of Pennsylvania, and they started telling me everything that they knew about everything, including local traditions that they were familiar with, including this Punxsutawney and Punxsutawney Phil. Up until then, I, like everybody else, was vaguely aware of something called Groundhog Day. That meant absolutely nothing, but it was on the calendar. And I remembered that thing about Punxsutawney, and I thought, oh, this could work. First of all, Groundhog Day. Never seen a holiday movie about that. Maybe it'll play every year. I hadn't started writing yet, but I was thinking, yeah, so this is good. And I knew that it took place in this small town about an hour and a half outside of Pittsburgh. And I thought, well, that's perfect. If you want somebody stuck in a day that starts feeling tedious, it has to be a big person in a very small place. And so I thought, well, that works, and we've got the groundhog, his name is Phil. I'll call my guy Phil too, maybe that'll be interesting. And all these ideas fell together, and then before I wrote it, I looked through the rest of the calendar to see if I had missed out on a better choice, and I went, nope, that was it. So that's how Groundhog Day became associated with the time loop.
So when you were writing, did you then go to Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney?
No. I was too lazy. It wouldn't have occurred to me to do that much research.
Could you Google it in '92?
No, there was no way to do that. I went to the library. Librarians? Anybody librarians? Yes. So I went to the library. I found the phone number for the Punxsutawney Chamber of Commerce. The day that this all came together was February 2nd, and I called them, and they answered the phone, Happy Groundhog Day. And I knew I had gotten it right, and this poor librarian endured about 20 minutes of my probing questions about the town, where I just tried to get a feel of what were the industries, what did people do, how big is it, how's it laid out, and she told me as best as she could, and then I just wrote it. And after it sold, and after Harold was attached to direct it, and Bill Murray was cast, and they were already building sets in Woodstock, Bill said, doesn't it bother you that none of us have seen the Punxsutawney Groundhog Festival? Not the star, not the writer, not the director. Don't you think someone ought to go? Why don't you come with me? When? Tomorrow. Oh, right. And at the time, we were living in Los Angeles, my wife and my 2-year-old daughter and I, and we were moving to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And the house was stacked with boxes, and there was a lot to do, and I was always thinking at that time, what does it mean to be a responsible blah, blah, blah. And I said, sorry, Bill, can't go with you, but you should go, have a good time. And he said, okay, well, if you change your mind, give me a call. So I hung up and went where Louise and one of our friends were packing up boxes. And they said, who was that? I said, it's Bill Murray. And that was weird already. And what do you want? Well, he wants me to come with him to Punxsutawney tomorrow. And Louise said, well, you said yes, didn't you? And I was like, hold on. Went back, called her back. Yeah, I'll go. So I got the studio to buy a friend of Louise's to travel with her and make the travel easier. And I was flying off to Punxsutawney with Bill Murray. And we did some research that was useful. got a much better idea what the groundhog ceremony looked like. I just sort of assumed that, oh, they go to some field, they look for a groundhog, they wait for they must have some committee who runs around after it trying to decide if he saw his shadow. And as you can imagine, it made for a very funny bit, but at the same time, it did not bear any resemblance to reality, and we figured that out and changed the script accordingly. And then one of the nagging unsolved problems of this screenplay was that Harold and I were trying to fix up was the big final act scene. We didn't know what it was, and Harold kept thinking maybe it was the Kleiser wedding, you know, the two kids who said they kept avoiding getting married, and then they did. It wasn't quite right, and I didn't love it, and I was looking through a local newspaper, and one of the things they had was a bachelor auction. I'd never heard of such a thing, but I thought, perfect. So we had the bachelor auction and other little rewrite things based on my post-research. Totally justifying my choice not to do all that work ahead of time. I didn't have to.
So how was spending Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney with Bill Murray?
Well, first of all, I'd never hung around with anybody who was so wealthy, or, well, that was just one of the characteristics, or so well known. And so walking with him in New York wasn't so bad because they're used to seeing celebrities, and he just walks really fast and keeps moving. And, you know, we would be in New York and people would, hey, what about Bob? Hey, you know. And he was very generous with people, but he didn't stop much. In Punxsutawney, that was impossible. It was a small town. We landed in the middle of the night somewhere, and there was already a crowd of people, and he couldn't take 2 steps without being surrounded and slowed down and stopped. And so it was surreal. It was kind of fun. At first, it was amazing to be around somebody like Bill Murray, and it's like, look at my life. Wow, this is great. And after about 2 weeks, I'd see Bill coming into the lobby of the hotel, and I was coming in, and I'd see him, and I had a split second to decide, are you going to get swept up in this or aren't you? Because as Harold used to call it, the Murricane is a real thing. Once you get involved with Bill, he's the center of the universe, and everything comes around him. He's saying all of a sudden, hey everybody, let's go bowling, or let's go shopping, or let's do something, and everybody comes with him, and you're being part of that. And I'm like, do I have serious work to do? Should I be writing? Can I get involved in this? So being with Bill was both amazing and sometimes took a lot of energy. He's very much like you would think he is from all the performances you've seen.
I forgot something earlier. The outburst from the librarian reminds me. So tomorrow we have an open house at the Woodstock Public Library. It's from 3 to 5. They have an amazing collection of things from the making of the movie in 1992. Sketches of some of the sets, how they anticipated them to look like, pictures from filming and stuff. If you're still in town tomorrow, 3 to 5 tomorrow at the Woodstock Public Library, it's a fun thing. So you come to Woodstock, and what's always kind of fascinated me is that you must have been writing on the fly, because everything in Woodstock, you couldn't have anticipated going to a town where they can drive a car down the train tracks, or there's a bell tower to jump out of, or I guess most towns are going to have the bowling alley, but I mean, you must have been adapting to what the town gave you.
I did not. I didn't. Whatever my portion of the program was, it was either mostly done by then, or the things that still had to be worked out didn't really relate to what we didn't have. I kind of think one of the choices of Woodstock for the town had to do with the fact that it already had the things that would accommodate the scenes, as opposed to the other way around. I don't remember changing anything because of Woodstock, but I was only here for the first week of shooting. After that, my guilt finally overcame me of leaving my wife and kid alone in a new house in a new town And they didn't need me on the set anyway. Harold was a wonderful writer. He and Bill also improvised somewhat. After shooting it the way it's written, then after that they improvised because it's comedy and it keeps it fresher. It's hard to capture comedy on film. And Harold, of course, has figured out how to do it in a way that works. So I wasn't involved in any of that. The only writing that was going on for me up until shooting while I was in Woodstock was about fixing up things that we had and making decisions about certain scenes. Like there's a scene I had written where Phil completely shaves his head and then the next day he's got hair. You know, it's sort of equivalent to the pencil thing. And yeah, the costume designer kept coming in and saying, do I have to build a wig or don't I? Is the wig in or out? You know, this sort of thing. And so we were making those kinds of decisions and trying to figure out how to work out the last issues of the script. And ultimately it wound up, you know, we finished our work and then Harold sat down and smoothed over everything to make it a Harold Ramis movie.
Going back to the musical for a minute, I forgot to mention that it was your first musical, yes? I mean, the first.
Yes.
Got 7 Tony nominations that year.
Woo! Woo!
Yeah, and they all went to Dear Evan Hansen.
It was tough competition that year. And you've received awards for the writing of Groundhog Day, the movie.
I got a BAFTA. It arrived in the mail. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know whether to take it seriously or not. And I now know it's like one of my most prized possessions. now that it's clear that the folks in England kind of dig me.
So, I forget where I was going to go with this. The movie, when it came out, I think Roger Ebert gave it like 3 stars. And, you know, that was your first movie, yes?
I can't remember. I had 2 movies that came out at almost the same time. The other one was called Hear No Evil. Or was it SFW? Yeah, it was. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, let me tell you my history. I can't remember which one came out first. Probably Groundhog Day. I think that one came out first. So yeah.
But I mean, it's 3 stars from Roger Ebert. It's like, oh. And then like a year later or something, he upped it. It was like it took a while for it to hit with him.
It was about, I think, 10 years later or
It was
something. Yeah, he went back and said, I was wrong. It was really good.
And what's just so, I don't know, funny is not the right word. It's more popular today than it was 30 years ago.
Yes, clearly. I mean, it came out and it got Roger Ebert kind of reviews, which were like, a pretty good Bill Murray comedy. And I was like, okay, we didn't do it. I thought we did it, but we didn't do it. Didn't cross over the line. And then I started hearing from usually people from overseas. First a guy in Germany who was a monk, and then who was telling me that it embodied all the principles of Christianity that he lived by. And then I heard from some couple that followed the Kabbalah, the mystical Jewish practice, and they said clearly it's about the Kabbalah. And then the Buddhists started chiming in their quiet way. And one by one, I started getting these reactions that were big. And then people who you'd heard of would start saying, oh, it's just like Groundhog Day. And people would go, yeah, I like that movie. Did you like that? Yeah, I like that movie. Yeah, that's my favorite movie. And it feels like it's easily defended as an excellent movie, no matter who you are. And so, yay, we win. And so it grew in popularity. And I think the other thing has to do with the expression, and that just the basis of the movie is this guy stuck in a very frustrating loop that he cannot get out of. And I think everybody has always felt that way at some time or another, and it didn't have a name. and now it had a name so people could apply it to that experience. And increasingly, all the individuals who see the movie from an individual perspective, they're able to connect with some part of the story in their own way, in their own language, whatever their religion or philosophy, it somehow works. And in addition to that, as a society, we have gone through some big repetitive stuff together. In politics, it comes up. In our foreign affairs and our foreign wars, it came up an awful lot. With COVID, it I think kind of nailed the coffin right there, and it's just the idea of Groundhog Day referring to this human experience, I think reinforces people's affection and connection to the movie, and I think that helps. And the other reason for its popularity is just really entertaining. It just is. It's just a fun movie to watch, even if you've seen it before.
Yeah, before Groundhog Day, it wasn't a thing, but or more so lately, as you said, you almost can't go a week without hearing it's a Groundhog Day thing. I mean, anything that repeats now is Groundhog Day, and Groundhog Day didn't have the repetition part of it until you brought it to us.
You're welcome.
Wait, is it a good thing that we So a couple of weeks ago, Andie MacDowell was being interviewed about her most recent project on the Today Show, and they asked her about her movies, and she reflected back on Groundhog Day from 30 years ago, and said that was probably her favorite and just a perfect movie. And I think we ought to look at it that way too. I've been hugging all the time, but there's a microphone in the middle aisle. If any of you have questions you want to ask of Danny, go ahead and climb up to the microphone. You've been asked questions all day long by the TV reporters. And man, we had every TV station in Chicago out here today. That was fun. They were probably asking you if you were a tree, or what's your favorite color. Any good questions you got from any of the press?
I suppose so, but nothing really shocking or out of the
Usual.
ordinary. The usual. Same old, same old. No, it's a real pleasure to be able to talk about something I know about and have opinions about, etc. So if you have any curiosity, it's an honor to be able to answer. I'll do my best.
Let's take some questions.
You'll make it up.
Groundhog Day being in pop culture, the reference of repeating, it was just even an episode of Quantum Leap this week, where he leaped into various people in the elevator before an explosion. Anyway, do you consider Groundhog Day to be a romantic comedy or comedic romance, more of a drama, or fantasy? How would you categorize it if you were pushed up against the wall?
That sounds pretty violent. I fell into thinking of it as an existential comedy, not really knowing whether that counted as a category. I don't know how many things you can put into that, but probably enough now that it's like, okay, it's an existential comedy. Other than that, there was always a romance in it, but it wasn't focused on that really. And Harold very sweetly brought that into the story and filled it up. So I do not think it's not a romantic comedy, but I guess that's a little dismissive. There just seems to be so much more to it. I love not being able to categorize it specifically, so I won't.
Now, just ask one other quick thing about the musical, which I saw when it was at the Paramount Theater down in Aurora. There's a series of scenes in the second act in which Bill actually dies. There's some pretty dramatic mourning and all that sort of thing.
Don't say too much.
But was that always a part of the conversion to a musical, part of the thought process that let's see how people react if he's actually gone?
I did write the scene with Rita and Larry sort of looking over the corpse and being upset and trying to figure out how such a confident seeming person could have done such a thing. That I don't remember where that idea came from. I was happy to write it. I'm glad it worked. The brilliant thing about the musical suicide sequence, to me, it was all Tim Minchin, and what he decided to do is he wrote this amazing song called Hope, and in a very, very big, passionate way, Phil Connors sings how you gotta have hope, and you really need it, and he says, well, you can't give up. You just have to keep trying. Just because you didn't succeed today doesn't mean you won't tomorrow. But he's talking about the suicides. He's talking about trying to kill himself and being unsuccessful at it. So it both becomes a joke and something that allows you to find humor in it. It's the set of amazing series of stage magic, because Phil, every time he dies, it's over here, and then he wakes up in bed way over here a second later, and the audience always applauds because they're fooled. Didn't see that happening. So it's funny, and it's deeply, deeply disturbing at the same time. And that's the kind of thing you can get away with in a musical.
Two short questions. Because it's Woodstock and we're going to analyze this movie to no end, I've gotten into discussions with others about the last line of the movie, we'll rent. In some people, and I've even taken that away too, was that like a negative thing, like him wanting to leave the town, like I don't know if I really want to stay here?
No, it was very much a Harold Ramis contribution. You have to end somehow. And so it's just a wink to the audience. It's Phil saying, I've already been here for 1,000 years. Maybe I want to go somewhere else, so let's not do anything too permanent here.
Okay, that makes so much more sense, yeah. And the second one was, I remember being fascinated when I bought the DVD, and my family had already watched it a few times. I was actually pregnant with my daughter, and she's 30 now, and we always joke about, and we know how old the movie is by her. But we've watched the movie a bunch of times, and finally we decided to watch it with Harold Ramis talking over it. And he said that you came up with the idea because you were doing the 5 stages of death.
Kubler-Ross.
Is that what that is?
Kubler-Ross.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that really how you got the idea, or?
Oh, no.
Because you didn't mention that at all, no.
Right. Yeah. Oh, Harold, who knows what he was thinking? No, basically, when we were working very hard, in some ways, we're very much similar people, friendly, menschy guys. But our comedic sensibilities are a little bit different, and I was also new and wanted to do something brash and different, and he wanted to do something different, but he wanted to keep his day job, And a lot of the working together was navigating through this, trying to figure it out. Now you got to tell me the question, because you got me talking. I forgot what I was answering.
Whether it was the 5
Oh yes,
stages.
and so at some point he was trying to really get his handle on how I structured what I had done, and I told him about the 5 stages or 6, whatever, how many stages of death and dying, and how Phil would, it seemed to me, go through stages of being a certain way. And I actually had divided it into 7 acts. Each one was a different stage of Phil's development. And at some point I was even writing cards like an old novel like Tom Jones, where it says, in which Phil decides to end it all, in which Phil kidnaps the groundhog. Each one was a chapter that sort of laid out. And when I told Harold about this, it's like a light bulb went off in his head, and he understood how to, it was a good razor for cutting off things that didn't fit into that pattern. And it really helped him finally seal up the movie and make it something that he could work with.
Very cool, thank you.
Yeah.
A few years ago, Bob Hudgens and the stuntman Rick Lefevre were here on stage telling stories about the making of Groundhog Day. And a few years ago, Stephen Tobolowsky, aka Ned Ryerson, was here telling stories. We're recording this. We'll try and put some of it up on our website, woodstockgroundhog.org, and maybe show some links on our Facebook page. So like us on Facebook, and you can follow along with some of the history, the backstories of Groundhog Day.
I just want to follow up with that and say that Stephen Tobolowsky is a wonderful storyteller. He's got a crazy memory for his childhood, and listening to the details of some of his stories are amazing. But I've heard him tell some of these groundhog stories, and I swear they do not conform to reality. He and I are friends, and we've gotten together many times since the movie came out. We didn't meet on the set, we never even met, but we started showing up to some events together and became friendly. Again, why was I telling you this? One wonders. Good storyteller, yeah.
It's very changed. You said some of the things don't line up.
Yeah, well, they don't. And it could be my memory, so there's that. But anyway, so enjoy his stories, but double check.
Well, I'm sure I speak for everyone in the room when I say thank you for writing this wonderful movie. It seems that in the movie you presented Phil Connors with a lot of challenges and obstacles to overcome, and he successfully overcomes all of them, it seems, except for the old man. And I'm wondering why you chose to include that, because it makes me cry.
Then we win. Basically, the reason I put in the old man was because Phil, previous to that, was seeing himself as a god. He was like, I can do anything. This is my town, this is my dominion. And the old man was the first sign to him that, yes, you can do an awful lot, maybe even more than you ever thought, but you can't do everything. There are some things you can't do. And that, to me, was the signal of him finally achieving his humanity. And that was very helpful to getting him out of the cycle.
Thank you.
Mr. Rubin, I ask you for your kindness and for the kindness of the audience as well. Never done anything like this before. I didn't think I'd be doing this today, but I admire your work very much, to say the least. I recently wrote a screenplay that I think is similar to Groundhog's Day. It goes a little something like this. When an impassioned patriot is cursed to change the past in his dreams, can he save a country in turmoil and his struggling family? Mr. Rubin, you don't need to answer this question, but I ask you to take this note. Will you please read my screenplay, American Dreams?
Hi, Danny.
Oh, hello.
Good to see you again. One thing you guys didn't mention is how you got into the dictionary in terms of the term Groundhog Day, and that, I believe, came from the Iraq veterans who had the same day over and over again in Iraq, and then it was put in the dictionary because it was such a common term over there. So that was my comment, and then my question is, it seems like the lesson of Groundhog Day is to be nice to insurance salesmen. And actually, on my Match.com profile, I asked the ladies that bother to read it, I say, what is the most profound movie you've ever seen? And no one has come up with more votes than Groundhog Day. So my question is, could you ever do it again? Is it possible to write something that is that? I consider it a rom-com and a philosophical thriller. Do you think there's another one inside?
Oh, dozens. It's hard. It's very hard to convince the studios that, you know, they generally say they want something original and different, but they really want something that is exactly like the last thing, that feels different. And I have been less and less interested in chasing that dream. Honestly, I don't think so. I think that was an accident of giant proportions, and it worked, and I'm grateful, and I just take them one at a time and do the best that I can. I'd like to think that there's something else in there, but it's silly to think that anything would have the kind of lucky trajectory that this movie did.
One more personal question, if I could. Wayne Dyer used to say that inspiration came from God. Do you agree or disagree?
I don't look at things that way, but that doesn't mean I disagree. If you got about an hour and a half? Yeah. Anybody who embraces that way of looking things, that helps them, and I think that's great. And I look at things my own way, and I remember there was some interview with Bill Murray where he mentions me by name, and both he and Harold were very generous about that, which is probably among the reasons why you would have me here. Screenwriters don't often get a spotlight. But somebody was asking Bill about this, and he says, I think Danny Rubin was touched by God. And I was thinking, it was non-consensual.
A lot of veterans would think you were touched by God.
I accept that, and I thank you very much for saying so.
But, after, Rocky 16 and some of the sequels go on and on, you could have chased the dollar, but probably thanks for not writing Groundhog Day 2.
Well, I have to say, the question I was actually going to ask, somebody already asked. It was about why you decided in the story for Bill Murray's character not be able to save the old homeless man.
Yep, asked and answered.
So I'm going to ask another question. And of course, the irony of that scene that, not only does he accept his humanity, the fact that technically, during that time, he's technically, not as God, he's technically immortal because of that time loop, and how that scene ironically shifts him back to his, mortal humanity, accepting that old man's mortality. But the question I'm going to ask is, another philosophical connection to the time loop can emerge in people who have social disabilities, and this is something I know very well because I work with the autism industry, and with a lot of people with those disabilities who the only way they actually succeed is not because is when they are redeemed and forgiven, when they might make the same social mistake as he does over and over again until something happens in their lives where they finally get it and then work hard to redeem themselves. Did you have any experience working with or interacting with people with social disabilities prior to making this film?
Not formally, no, nothing like that. I mean, just about half of everyone I know is sort of somehow, on some level, socially not as adept. But no, and so I don't think anything about that specifically influenced the writing. But just as with everything else, you can find these parallel themes in almost every group of people in one way or another.
Absolutely, no. It's always remarkable when someone tells a story, with the story in the work that I do, when they have not had that experience, it can still tell a story that can be used by that group of people at the same time. So thank you.
Thank you.
This is so funny because I stand out there on the bandstand on a cold winter's morning, and I'm just excited looking out on the smiling faces and the silly groundhog hats we wear. I have a pretty simple view of Groundhog Day, and yet there's this whole other deep feeling that goes with many people have these deep thoughts, and some of the TV reporters that I've talked to today ask these, what's the deeper meaning of Groundhog Day? I have this very simplistic view, and just look at the fun that this brings to people, and that's why we do it, is the fun aspect of bringing people to Woodstock, and I get a charge out of the people that I meet each year coming for Groundhog Day that just say what a beautiful town this is and how nice the people are, and it's like, I don't need the deep meaning, that's good enough for me, I'm good with that. Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming back and spending the time with us again on this special day for so many of us. And it probably serves as yet another reminder of exactly how popular the film is and how much it is beloved, not just here in Woodstock or in Illinois or the U.S. And what I found, I was curious about what has been your experience with the international aspect of the film and the other countries and how they view it. Does it have the same broad acceptance by other cultures and other languages that we see here?
Let me just first add that last night at trivia downstairs, we had a gentleman from Germany who came to Woodstock. He's here for Groundhog Day. We had a family who flew in yesterday from Mexico City. It has gone worldwide.
That's my understanding. I do get letters and occasionally invitations from people all over the place. One of the fun things for me is when it came out, the producers would send me posters from different countries, or they'd tell me, they don't have groundhogs almost anywhere but here. So I think my favorite was in Korea. The translation is for the movie, Black Hole of Love.
That's so good.
So I think I get the feeling that it works just as well everywhere, and I don't have a country by country list. I think that would be fascinating. So good question. Thank you.
In the musical, there's a line, is it a squirrel, is it a beaver? Kind of both, but not quite either. I most years drive Woodstock Willie around the town square in the annual Christmas parade. And years ago, 20 years ago or something, I'd hear people on the street going, it's a squirrel, it's a rat, it's a tree chipmunk. And Woodstock Willie's notoriety in town has grown so that now it's like, Woodstock Willie! So he's become more popular here. And the movie, I've got a friend in Japan, and he showed me the cover of the CD box with the title in Japanese. So yeah, it's worldwide. I remember the first time I rode on a plane and was looking at the index of on-demand movies, and this is 20 years after the movie came out or something, and there's Groundhog Day on demand on the plane. It's everywhere. Chris?
Hi, it's an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for your wonderful movie, and I had a chance to see the musical on Broadway. It was incredible, so thank you. And my question is, I loved your story about the chili cook-off, and that was something that he brought into the musical. You had mentioned Bill and Harold, I don't know them by first name, but doing improv, and you seeing that later in the movie. Did you bring any of their improvisation into the musical?
Not really. The plays, you do it as written, and that's one of the joys for the writer. In Hollywood, it doesn't matter what's written. If a movie star who's more bankable than the writer, which is all of them, if they want to change a line because it makes them more comfortable, sometimes it's easier to say yes than just to say no, stick to the script. In plays, it's not like that. And as a writer, it's like somebody being polite and taking care of you, where before they were dismissive and just ignored you. So there were, during rehearsals, a lot of the times the actors would come up with an impulse to say something slightly different, and they would ask. And then almost always I would say, yes, that's great, because you want to go with their energy. And sometimes I would say no, or I would say, how about more like this? I would rewrite it a little bit. But that's where the improv came in, not during the show. During the show, what they improv is different levels of energy and where they're looking, and you know, they try and eke out more energy out of their moments. But that's all performance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Hopefully you understand the therapeutic value that this movie has for a lot of people, and especially for me. In my Air Force career, I was coming in on a mission, and I started having what I thought was a heart attack. And it was the pre-starts of PTSD from the time I flew with medevac flights in and out of Vietnam. So my therapist said to me, you can't fix those days. So watch this movie Groundhog Day, and every time you have those nightmares, write down how you would like that day to have been, if you could change it. And every time I watched that movie, it fixed that aspect and made my career successful. I eventually retired as a 4-star general. Had I not been able to get through that sort of when watching the movie and seeing what it was that Bill Murray was trying to do for himself, I couldn't have fixed it. And I thank you for that.
Fantastic, thank you. And actually, I would like to add how rare it is that people look at it as a potential source for a solution, because it's become so popular just to sort of use the summary term Groundhog Day just to refer to the bad part, the part of being stuck and the part of being in repetition. But just like that gentleman, there are many therapists who have written to me, say, I prescribe this to my patients, and obviously with some, you know, professional direction and such. And I'm just so proud that it's useful. That means a lot to me. Yes.
Hi, Egnell Queen here from the future. So sometimes a movie takes on a greater persona than the sum of its parts, and I think you've accomplished that. Looking back at it now, do you think that, is it possible that there is some sort of parallel universe there, or some constant being in the movie, whether it be a character or a persona, something in the movie that you would say is different looking back at it now? Or there's a lot of theories out there, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I've heard people say things like, I think the bartender is God, or, you know, the way he looks and laughs at Phil's silliness or whatever. Clearly, he's an all-knowing being. It's like, no, he's a good actor, he's a good bartender. I don't look at it that way, but I love having those interpretations. There's obviously connection between having a lot of alternate reality days and string theory and everything everywhere all at once, of course. There are a lot of ways to go with how you philosophically look at the repetition. Myself, I just see it as a parable. It's a fantastic out-of-reality occurrence that somehow, once you dismiss the fact that it's magical, all of a sudden the rest of the movie is just like real life, really. And that, to me, is the interesting part. The rest of it, I let other people explore, and I often learn from their perspective, so it's fun for me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi Danny, my name is Steven, and this is like Groundhog Day all over again for me. I met you 10 years ago when you were here. I've lived in Woodstock for 20 years. That's right. All through. I had never heard of the movie before I moved here, and since moving here, I've seen it over and over and over again, and each time I gleaned more insight and the depth of the movie, and it caused a lot of conversations, prompted conversations with people. And I'm a writer, and I wrote an article, and the last time you were here, I gave you the article, and about 2 weeks later, I got notified by Michael Schulman, who was, I guess, your part of the entourage, and they were doing an article in New York Magazine, and he wanted to quote part of it. Anyway, I don't know if you actually ever got it, but I have it here, and I'm asking you if you'll just read it. It's nothing, no script, no nothing like that. Just I'd like your thoughts. I included my email address. Anyway, also, just one thing about the movie. Everybody that I know, which is like 99% of the people that I talk about, or the name comes up for Groundhog Day, they all think it's in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, right? Only people from Woodstock actually know, no, it's in Woodstock. And being a Woodstockian and myself now, I noticed the only thing that gives it away in the movie is where it says Woodstock Jewelers, right? Was that intentional or an oversight, or do you know?
I do not know.
You don't know.
It wouldn't have been me that had anything to do with it, do you know?
I believe it's that business owner would not agree to Columbia Pictures. No?
That was deliberate.
Deliberate.
It was deliberate. It was an actual, that was Harold's choice, a tip of the hat to.
So it's, I think, the only place in the movie you see Woodstock.
It is.
So there's 3 storefronts over there that didn't get facades changed. Woodstock Jewelers, Lloyd's Paint and Paper, and Swiss Made Bakery, I think. Lots of the other storefronts were changed. The real estate office on the other side of the square became Rexall Drugs or something. So some of the things changed. So I'm sorry, I know you're our guest from Germany. I've forgotten your name.
Clemens.
Clemens, yeah. Hello.
Thank you for coming all the way for Groundhog Day.
Well, thank you. I thought of the quote, "No pain, no gain," and I would like your personal opinion on which aspect of the film maybe represents this the best or the most, or one scene maybe?
No, that represents that feeling of no pain, no gain?
That saying, maybe it's my interpretation of it.
If German's up here, if you need to speak it in German.
Well, I think, no, I don't want to give the answer for you.
Well, you might have to. I'm always interested in people's perspectives, and that's, I know the phrase, and it usually has to do with lifting weights, but I know how it applies to general life too. Boy, I'd have to just sort of tick through the movie and think of stuff, but what do you think?
Well, many scenes. I have to think of it myself once more.
But it's a fair perspective. I mean, I do generally, I don't know if I like to put it that way, because it makes all gain somehow painful, and I don't necessarily feel that way about things, but I have found in my personal life that the things where I've moved forward and advanced were things where I put in that extra effort, or worked harder, or made a sacrifice. So I think that there's some truth in that for sure, and it wouldn't surprise me if that worked its way into the movie.
Let me turn the table on you for a minute, though. We were talking about the world exposure for Groundhog Day. In Germany, is Groundhog Day a popular, well-known movie?
Yes. Yes. I'm not the best in giving short answers. I have a cousin that happens to say, it's his favorite movie as well, and we share some family background, and it will still take me some years to figure out what that movie makes it so attractive to our family dynamics.
Yeah.
What's the film called in German?
Täglich grüßt das Murmeltier.
Which means?
Daily greets the groundhog. But I learned groundhog is not exactly the Murmeltier, which lives in the Alps or in the mountains. So I have to do some research on this.
Get busy.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we've been going at this for an hour. We could keep going. We'll go a couple more questions, and then we'll we'll wrap up and move on to other things.
So I realized I had a different question about the scene with the homeless old
I
man.
have seen you before.
So I realized, you know, when I first watched that scene, it's like it's an interesting contrast between, you know, his mortality at that point, and at the time, you know, Phil Connors is still technically immortal by being in the time loop. Was that that part of the reason why you had the scene where he couldn't save the old man, because the contrast between, you know, Phil's immortality and the old man's mortality at that point?
I'm having trouble
The idea is,
following what I could answer that's different from what I described before.
was there like was the purpose of the contrast, you know, here is this immortal this person who's technically immortal at the time now, who ironically is angry at his immortality in the time loop, while this old man is still technically mortal, just that contrast in that scene, was that part of the inspiration for why the old man did not survive?
Not exactly. It was really just from Phil's point of view of seeing himself as somebody who could do anything. And I knew that he needed a challenge like this to finally come down from his cloud and realize that he's just like everybody else. And so from Phil's perspective, we can see how he had to come down some. From my perspective, no, I wasn't trying to put an immortal next to a mortal and somehow make a point like that.
Well, thank you.
Well, sure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm going to take the mic over here.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Danny. Thank you very much for writing this film. Really do appreciate it. I am a film teacher at one of our local community colleges here, and this is always in my curriculum. So I have the ability to reintroduce this to students who have seen this before and let them understand it in a different way. Look at the different layers in it. Look at the spirituality, or you know, look at the dark humor in this. But I'm also introducing this to students who have no idea that this movie ever existed. So to see their fresh little brains just kind of pop open is just a wonderful thing. We look at it in a couple different ways the week that I teach this, and one is film tourism. So we talk about Woodstock, and many of them being from this local area, well, of course they know Woodstock, but some don't realize its part in the movie and what that means economically, what that means to film tourism, which is what we're dealing with here today too. But one of the things that they do reflect on with the film and bring it up to modern times is they mention the Netflix TV series of Russian Doll, Natasha Lyonne's series, and having just binged the whole thing there, I'm seeing the similarities, but also sort of like an homage to what Groundhog Day is about. Do you have any reflections on what Russian Doll means to the next generation of Groundhog Day viewers?
No. But I'll talk about it if you want. I mean, I enjoyed Russian Doll a lot. I thought it was, it was, fun to see somebody else exploring the similar idea within a different world and with a different main character. But it wasn't until she bumps into somebody else who's going through the thing that I went, because I was wondering what was their idea that would allow this to keep going. I didn't know how they were going to sustain it. And when they started introducing other people into the same time loop, I thought, okay, that's very clever, that'll work. So I saw it only from a storytelling kind of point of view. The rest of it, you'll have to leave it up to them and what they discover, because I really don't have a lot to say about that. You're very welcome. Thank you for teaching the film. That's great.
And I just had a follow-up comment, something that you mentioned about how the critical response had changed, and Roger Ebert had changed his mind and re-reviewed it. But in fact, in his last years, he made he named his great movies, which is, if you go to RogerEbert.com, and it might be a list I didn't count, 100, and Groundhog Day is one of his great movies. So
I had a great adventure with Roger Ebert once. I was in Chicago for was it a film festival? It was a competition, not unlike the Oscars that they had in Chicago. I can't remember much about it, but Roger was there, and at some point we wound up at the same table, and then he and his wife wanted to go out to eat, and they grabbed me and one of the other writers, and the four of us were driving all over Chicago looking for a restaurant to eat in. Not much to that story, but there was a relevant reference, and I'm enjoying tripping through my memory on that.
So you bought dinner, and then he increased his ranking.
Now my secret's out.
Last question.
Last question. In looking at Wikipedia at the description, the one thing that I thought was really interesting was that there was an Italian remake of Groundhog Day. How was that experience, and how did you have to change that for perhaps an Italian audience?
It was so lovely. I got a credit somehow on that. I just heard about it when it was done, and I'd never seen it, and I thought it was all just amazing. And I think somebody told me that it was the first time somebody had taken an American movie and remade it as a foreign film, as opposed to the other way around. I don't know if that's true, but put that in your hat and smoke it. I want to say one more thing, just briefly, which is when people ask me questions, I answer what I know, and I answer from my perspective. And you ask me about writing Groundhog Day, and I'll tell you everything I can. But I think, especially here in Woodstock, it's not my business to give Harold Ramis his due, and yet Harold Ramis should get his due. It's his film, and I really appreciate that.
Daniel?
Yeah, I'm going to take advantage of my position as director of the opera to put the last question to you. And to wrap this up and put a nice bow on it. So, first of all, thank you for coming. Thank you for gracing our stage with your presence. I think the audience enjoyed it. So, to give you the final wrap-up and to give you the final word, I would just like to know, you talk about the Bill Murray hurricane, right? Obviously, Groundhog Day itself has taken on its own life and become a hurricane of its own. You have now had 30 years now to be in the eye of this storm. I would like to know not how the movie, because the movie came from you, clearly. I would like to know how this has changed your life and how it has affected your life.
Well, I've only had this one life as far as I know, and this one has Groundhog Day in it. So it's hard to know what the life other would have been. I can say that the groundhog has been very good to me. I mean, not necessarily financially. That all went to Bill. But the opportunities that I've had, the people that I've met, the knowledge that I've gained from people explaining to me what I meant when I wrote it. It's actually all just wonderful. I mean, this is a complete blessing, and anytime I feel myself getting a little annoyed with having another interview with somebody, or being asked the same question again as if it's the first time, I stop myself and say, look at your life, man. This is amazing. And I am so appreciative. I don't know where my lesson in appreciation would have come from other than, if not from Groundhog Day. And to be associated with something that's so well loved is a lucky thing I couldn't have planned. So thank you all. Thank you. Thank all of you, and you, and you, and you.
Groundhog Day's been very good to Woodstock.
Good. Well, I'm happy for that.
We thank you all for coming. If you're sticking around, you can pick up the schedule out front. Look at the schedule at woodstockgroundhog.org. Come to the library tomorrow for the open house from 3 to 5, Woodstock Public Library. over the weekend, you can hear more stories about Groundhog Day from Bob Hudgens, do the walking tour, go see the movie again. As I said this morning, people talk about Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, but without the story, we wouldn't all be here. Danny, thank you for coming.